Hello and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me in another of my wonderful interviews. Today, we're going to have a bit of a discussion actually with my interviewee on a book that came out a couple of years ago that is incredibly relevant to a lot of the things that I've been talking about and many other people have been talking about. And it's a question of looking, I suppose, deeply into it to see who is controlling what. My guest is Liz Phillips from The Great Resist, and she joins me now. Hello, Liz.
Richard, how kind of you to have me on. And yes, what a book to get people interested in, I think.
Well, we better show the book. Here it is, and it's called The Illuminati Agenda 21 by Dean and Jill Henderson. And I think it came out in 2019, just before the pandemic. But although it's a slimmish volume, it packs a punch.
It does indeed. And I think, Richard, everybody starts talking about the World Economic Forum and Build Back Better and we're all useless feeders and all this sort of thing. But the people that really control the world and not the World Economic Forum, I believe they're just the mouthpieces. And I think it's important that we talk about people and institutions, if you like, organizations that nobody is talking about because they are the shadows that are actually in control.
Yes, I mean I totally agree, and when you look at the WEF, for example, and Klaus Schwab, I mean it's said so many times he looks and sounds like a Bond villain, and if that doesn't sort of tell you it's a little bit set up in and of itself, I don't know what would. How would you get somebody to look more like Donald Pleasance than Donald Pleasance did? For those that remember that remarkable actor, they do seem like, in a way, stooges, and that beyond that there is something more going on. And this book, of course, is illuminating exactly who the Illuminati are.
Yes, and it goes back, and I think the first part of it goes back to the perpetrators, Richard, and it goes back to really the Sumerian times, back to Babylon, etc. So it takes you right back. And you know, it starts off by, if you look at Genesis and coming out of the Garden of Eden, and at the end of it, it's very positive in going back into the Garden of Eden.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think one of the things that people are often surprised is just how far back these sort of plans have been going on. And a lot of people think it's only fairly recently they've heard of the WEF and they've heard of Agenda 21 or Agenda 30 and the United Nations and how they're sort of being manipulated and all of that. And yet, of course, this goes, some people think it just goes back to the beginning of last century. But as you so rightly said, I mean, it goes right back to almost the very beginning of man, which is very worrying that these things have been going on for so long.
I think the difference now, Richard, is too that probably in those days, the news didn't travel quite like it does now. So now we're all open up. We opened up to this wonderful world of the internet. We could all of us be in severe trouble, of course, if that gets shut down. And there are ways that they could do that. And so the message that you put out, I put out, and all of us on this sort of level and scale of the internet, we could all be shut out altogether if they pull the plug. And that's the
Um,
worrying thing. But and the
yes,
other thing, of course, is the amount of the population in the world now is so different to what it was back in the times of pre Christ, if you like, BC. So we're now up to, I think, just under 8 billion in the world. And of course, Agenda 21, of which these people are all in charge of, or seem to be, want to reduce it to under a billion.
yes, and that's a staggering amount of deaths or depopulation that would have to be done in a remarkably short space of time. And I know that many of the viewers to my channel will be aware of one of the major methods that they have been. Some people are saying that's just the first stage of delivering something, and so it is. And of course, it because it's so big. people find they almost cannot believe it. You can give them the facts and they'll just say, do you know, this is so far-fetched that it's too much to take in. And that's one of the biggest problems, because then you get put into the box as conspiracy theorist. And while it might be a conspiracy, it is somehow turned you into a quack, into a loony, into somebody who's spouting absolute nonsense. And yet many of us now have been waking up, myself included, to the facts that this has been going on and is going on, and it's extremely worrying.
It is. And when you look about it, Richard, if you start to look now into things like inoculations, if you think back to when we were children, you come a little bit after me, but when you go back, there were two or three inoculations. I think they're up now to 69 different inoculations by the time you're 16. Now that is frightening. All these things going into little children's bodies. They're now talking about autism, which was sort of one in, I think it was about 20,000 10 years ago. It's now down to 1 in 80. One
Yeah.
in 80, 80. And they reckon by 2050 it could be down to as much as 1 in 3. Now, what is causing all this? Because there wasn't autism. Yes, there's always been various things when we were young. Obviously, there's been people that have had disorders of one thing or another, but not on this sort of scale. And the book itself goes into how these things have come about. And I think it's very important that all the readers buy a copy of this, and don't take it from you or from me, but the facts are there. And, it will open up people's eyes to so many things that, we wonder how we're going to control.
No, I agree. And I've seen those stories about the children and the autism and the ADHD and all of those things and it's so common, isn't it, for people to say, oh, he's on the spectrum, as if it's now an everyday occurrence. And yet, as you say, when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, it was very rare. I mean, I had a friend who had whose mother had taken thalidomide, so he had arms that were not correct as a result of this. Lovely bloke, got on really well. He was my best friend, and I accepted him as he was. But it was quite rare to find people like that. Whereas with autism now, as you say, I mean, it's a huge amount, and it is a huge worry for parents. Schools are struggling. If kids are in that system, they're struggling to deal with children who are not fitting the norm. And as you say, the book goes on to describe how and why that has become more and more prevalent in today's society. And it is very, very worrying.
It also goes on to say, Richard, if you remember that this could be an excuse when people are so severely damaged. When you think about it, that children with autism grow into adults with autism. And if you look at some of the awful experiments that have gone on in the past, and we won't need to go into them all, but if you go into them, it's an excuse to cull the people that have got severe disabilities. And that is the really, really frightening thing that people want to wake up and have a look at. Because if it is down to 1 in 3 in 2050, they reckon, with autism, what better excuse will these maniacs have than to pull the plug? We're already seeing things like Liverpool pathway and people with do not resuscitate. I don't want to go to hospital. I'm 75 coming up 76. I feel absolutely fantastic. But they look at the age, you can imagine, can't you? Especially my husband's there as well. He might well have DNR on there, but you know what I mean. Do not resuscitate is just ridiculous for people that you look at the people from care homes and all the people that died. Most people, when they had this COVID-19, even at sort of 80 plus, there was only a very minor percentage that actually died. So it's just frightening.
Yes, and of course it is odd, and people have been making this observation that since the world decided to take a certain substance all at pretty much the same year, that we have seen a mass of excess deaths that we've not seen before. People like Dr. John Campbell, who runs his own YouTube, has been looking at this and commenting and can't quite work out why, when all these people were given something that was really good, and yet actually they all seem to be falling down. And the thing that is claimed to be really good, as this book goes on to describe, this book is just written before all of that, but we can tell who is responsible for those things, have an ulterior motive, which is I mean, the irony of all of this, I suppose it's not really an irony, but the terror of all this is that they publicize this. They tell us this is the plan. And I mean, Mr. Schwab himself has written a book, and in it says that people will be euthanized, and that they're going to keep a certain number of the Chinese because they've been very much obedient for the last few decades, thanks to the communist state that they live in. Whereas in the West, we're far too, and you wouldn't think it, but we're far too much the critical thinkers, or using common sense, and we're used to having freedom. We might cause a bit of a stink if people start to force us about a bit. I'm very pleased that people would do that.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, not enough, Richard. And I think they were greatly encouraged when the supposed pandemic came out back in 2019-20. They were so encouraged by the number of people that just immediately went from being completely free like this and to masking up and staying indoors. I just couldn't understand it at all. But so many people did. And that they thought that was a real winner. And
Yeah.
what is coming next? That's the problem. But it's the people behind all this, Richard. And we look at the sort of the 8 major banks of the world, and above them they're controlled by the Bank of International Settlements, as we all know. Then you've got the 8 really big banks, which includes the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers. And then you look and see what they own. And you look at you start to talk about big pharma, which is really what we've been talking about for the last few minutes. The Rockefellers own over 50% of big pharma, which makes billions out of all these vaccinations for children. So many children have died and are in such terrible state after these vaccinations, because who knows what one vaccination works against the next one that they're taking. So when you look at who's behind all this is the bit that people need to look at really, really carefully and see who is actually pulling the strings in the world. Look at the wars that are going on. And we've only learned fairly recently, I think, some of us, that, of course, the bankers funded both sides of the world wars.
Yes. So they can't lose.
Oh, absolutely not. And the amount of interest, of course, that they charge on what they lend for people to go to war. I mean, they're just, as you say, they can't lose. So you can understand why Jesus threw the money lenders out of the temple, if I remember rightly, if my biblical tuition was correct. He wants to come back and start doing something again, I feel.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the problem we have is that because this has been going on for so long, and these fingers are in pretty much every pie, and I think most of my viewers, regular viewers, are becoming more and more aware of that. And of course, I welcome new viewers who are curious and interested and exploring this for the very first time, which is where a book like this really will help to define it, although you will swallow many times and think, can that really be going on? And you may end up going down a rabbit hole or two to realize actually, yes, it is, because there's a huge leap of faith that you have to make to understand that this is actually really going on. But the question is, with these people who've been doing this for so long, how do we find remedies that can prevent the massive humanity catastrophe that is being rolled out for us, and we, the majority, are blindly acquiescing to?
Well, when you look at it, Richard, we've discussed a little bit. We've mentioned the banks and we've mentioned big pharma. The other thing, of course, that's really going through the hoops at the moment is agriculture. And if you look at the genetically modified foods, etc., and all these things that are going on now, you can see that it's not just it's everything coming together,
Mm.
and we're being hit on all fronts. And we're going to talk seriously about agriculture very shortly because farmers over here are being paid to go out of farming. They're being paid to rewild everything, to plant trees. They're being paid to do everything except produce food.
Which is a nonsense. You know.
Complete nonsense. Well, you
I,
look at what's happened with the farmers in Holland, you'll see that they've had a huge political party and some success with that, because Holland, I think, is the second largest food producer in the world. And then you look at places like New Zealand, who are going through exactly the same. If only people could join the dots up, this isn't just happening in the UK, it's happening all over the world. So, of course, if you want to get rid of a population, look what they've done in Africa. Instead of everybody getting behind Africa and getting water and desalination, etc., where Africa could be a wonderful country, they've just let it go, and so everybody's in famine.
mm.
We had all these big pushes, if you like, by musicians, etc. Worried about the war. And you have to say, I'm sorry to tell everybody, I think this is all being done deliberately to kill off the population. Where did AIDS come from?
Well, yes, there's a question for you. Um,
Where did they
again,
try it out first? How did AIDS get in? It got in through an inoculation for smallpox. That's where it started, and it's sort of gone through the population. It started off that way, and then of course it's a sexually transmitted disease for mainly for men, who they thought were the Illuminati. Think are the least nice people in society, if you like. So let's get rid of them. So you have to look at all these things and see it all happening, and then you look at the destruction through fire and pestilence, if you like. You look at the fires recently, if you look at Maui in Hawaii, and you look at direct energy weapons, and then you look at something like HARP, which is the HAARP, the weaponization of the weather, done by the Americans, and China have got a similar program. You start looking at all of this, and it all comes through in a book like The Illuminati. So the subjects we cover sound absolutely horrendous, but it's all there, folks, for everybody to go and have a look at. And it's something that we've known for some time.
and there was a point there that was on the tip of my tongue as you were talking there, that so many of these things, just as you say, they sound so far-fetched that you could weaponize the weather. But the Illuminati have had this knowledge for a long time, and experiments have been going on which have just not been in the public domain. So when we say that's going on, and it can sound complete nonsense and far-fetched or science fiction, well, it might do. It wouldn't sound science fiction if you knew that 50 years ago these experiments were going on, and it was an everyday occurrence to a very small select number of people. And we've seen, and I've had on Dane Wigington on the channel talking about the chemtrails that have been going on for a very long time after the Second World War. And people don't look up. They don't look up at the sky. And the other day I was standing outside my house. It was first thing in the morning. And where I am down on the south coast, I've got Gatwick Airport about 40 minutes away by car, Heathrow about an hour or so to the north of me, and planes go to Europe across my house every day. And every day you can look up and planes just go across. On this particular day, it was like someone had mown the lawn. It was the stripes going across the sky, and I'd never seen that in such ordered fashion. And as I was just looking up, and I was said to people as they were going to work, I said, look up there. What do you think of that? And they just glanced, or they thought I was mad. And they glanced and went, oh, that's a bit odd. And I said, yeah, hang on a minute. It's not just odd, is it? Because we have planes every day. You don't normally see that. It's just... And I was trying to plant the seed that it's something weird. If I was to say, oh, it's chemtrails and they're poisoning the air and all of that, they'd just really think I was mad. But by trying to sort of say, isn't that odd? Don't you just think that's odd? But most people don't see what's in front of them. They're just blind because it's been a very slow approach. But now, as we're getting to a critical point, and more things are being thrown at us, and that the dots may not be immediately obvious, but the digital IDs and the central bank digital currency, cash being taken away, more and more of the chemtrails, the fact that water is constantly having fluoride put into it, which isn't a natural product, and why would you want that in? In the past, it's to do with your teeth, and it was there to help the children get strong bones. But when you start looking into all these things, we don't need any of this nonsense. And clearly, we are being poisoned and attacked in the past very subtly, but now it's not so subtle, and still nobody notices. And it's flabbergasting.
I understand, Richard. And also, if you look up at the sky, I've often looked at flight radar, and and I can tell you now, sort of through the day and through the night, which planes are going over us and where they're going. Now they go, as you say, in one direction, either that way or that way. When you wake up in the morning and the trails are going sort of from east to west instead of north to south, and no planes have gone over there on flight radar because they're just not that quantity anyway. You think, I think I understand what's going on here.
Yes.
And I think it was Donald Trump, wasn't it, that said, he wants to put a stop to the chemtrails. See, he actually came out and said that in the Senate, in America. And he said if this was before, that he wanted to put it. So we know very well, it is happening.
Yes.
And that, it's
and even on the government website, there's a page that talks about geoengineering. So the government acknowledge it, and of course people are talking, saying, but this is to dim the skies, to reflect back the dangerous sun, because it's the sun that's warming us up because of the CO2. And that's the other thing that overpins so many things, is this business of man-made global warming. It's all our fault. Since the Industrial Revolution, it's all been our problem. We've created this situation that we're now having to restrict people and push them, corral them into 15-minute cities, reduce the amount of travelling they can do. And in order to do that, we have to clearly, for your safety, put up cameras, take your biometrics, limit the amount of travel you can do, and with our new programmed money, stop you buying the things that really are not good for the planet. And again, the science is fixed. I mean, since when was science fixed? We saw that with the approach to the pandemic. The science was absolutely fixed there too. There was only one way out of that crisis, regardless that eminent scientists had put together a thing called the Great Barrington Declaration, which wasn't even aired.
No, you're right. And if anybody wants to look, they want to see what's happening in Saudi Arabia with the NEOM city. I don't know whether you've seen it, Richard. NEOM.
Is this the line? Is this the line?
Yes, this is the line. I've actually know an engineer who's working out there on there at the moment. It's absolutely, if that's how people want to live their lives, well, that's down to them. But you need to go and look at it to see what they're engineering for the future. It's so frightening, really. But we all have to, from bottom up, do what you've been advocating. What I've been advocating is just say, no, thank you. We're not having it. And, the only way to do it is by mass of people saying, no, thank you, we're not having it. And this little old island of ours has done so much good in the world, and probably some bad as well, but it has done a lot of good in the world, Richard, and many good things have come out of the UK. So we've got to all get together and just say no. to the World Health Organization wanting to take over health across the world. And we know that they're the perpetrators behind much of what is going on at the moment.
Yes, very much so. And the government, it seems to be absolutely at their mercy. I mean, if people haven't worked out that the government came in with a bunch of promises and threw those away pretty quickly, and has been coming up with great ideas for us, which they're going to implement whether you like it or not, without actually consulting anybody. That's not a government that I particularly would like to live under if in a democratic, and that's arguably not necessarily, that's mob rule, but in what we would normally think of a democratic society, that if a government is then going against what most people have actually asked for, and not even asking them whether you'd like to have, say, 5G, for example, a superpower internet, allegedly, that will download films much, much quicker and potentially have other radiation problems that haven't really been tested properly as far as the public are concerned or consulted about, then it's not the kind of government that I really want.
No, I totally agree with you. And if you think, I don't know whether you've seen that Elon Musk has just asked for volunteers to go forward now to have the chips put into your brain. So, meddling with nature and meddling with creation is just, to me, is the most insane. And I'm afraid the word I use is evil, satanic, whatever you like to the. How dare anybody try to put a chip into your brain so you can be linked up to computers? What on earth is going on? Now, I have to tell you that I believe this man is part of the Illuminati as well. He has a very round, benevolent face, is not quite as sharp as somebody like Tony Blair, who I can't stand the look of. But you look at somebody like Elon Musk, he does have a benevolent looking face. But behind all this is you need to look at all the patents. And if you look at, I think it's Dr. David Martin, he's an American. He's done far more work on patents than I have. But I think it's Microsoft took out a patent some time ago to track you through your bodily fluid. Now, without putting something into you, this is a Microsoft patent that they've got to track you through your bodily fluids. So
Gosh.
people must read this book and other books and form their own opinion. They don't have to listen to me, on what I think. But it's the work that I've done backs up what I've read in this book, and I've done the work before I read the book. If you know what I mean, Richard.
Yes, yes.
So, it only backs up what I've already learnt, if you like, over the last few years.
And I agree. It's very concise, and of course there are plenty of other books which will do a similar job. One of the reasons I like this book is it's very concise. It's an easy read. Okay, it's going to challenge you. But then I interviewed Fergus Greenwood, who wrote 180 Degrees, but that's 800 pages. Of course, he'd be delighted if you buy that book as well, but it'll take you a bit longer. Whereas this is a concise read. You can find out who the Illuminati are, or the Cabal, if you want to call them that. They go under all sorts of different names. Exactly what Agenda 21 is, or it's now Agenda 30. And what it means for humanity. And you're right about these chips. I mean, we've seen already top and tail of my YouTube videos are adverts. And if you watch a YouTube video, I've noticed that there is a particular brand, I won't name it, and it'll talk about having a watch or a Fitbit thing. They all link together for this one thing, and on the face of it all makes sense. Oh yes, that links in with their other system and their other system and all of that. But actually, all of those things really are collecting data about you, and that's very dangerous. If somebody knows every damn thing about you, especially if they're tracking you from your body fluids, how does that make you feel? That somebody else knows more about you than you know yourself. I think it's a very worrying situation. But Liz, we're painting a picture of doom and gloom here. And the thing is, I know that you're not someone who's going to just sit back and let it happen and go, oh well, look, I'm in my 70s. What does it matter? I'll pop my clogs at some point, hopefully not in the next 50 years or so, and I'll leave it to the younger generation to sort out. So we're both fairly optimistic people. What are we going to do about it?
Well, I think the most important thing, Richard, is to educate people and to not go in all guns blazing, because I don't think that helps. But I think gradually, through programs like yours, programs like mine, the conferences that I've been running, I've run two already this year, as you know. You've been very kind. You sent a video for Newport, and then you came up to Peterborough, and then we're moving on to the Northwest in November. And it's to get people of expert knowledge in various different parts of what we've been talking about to come along and chat and to give their view, and then to be seen, to be there, to be got at, to talk to. And so many people are coming along, and you saw it in the last one, where they're, if you like, new to this, and they know a little bit, and then they see another part that they hadn't woken up to, and they, gosh, I hadn't looked at that. I mean, I was interested to, I went to the ploughing match yesterday, the East Kent ploughing match, God bless it. It's my annual holiday for the day. And, when I was young and growing up, father was a farmer. In the days before we had even combines, we had threshing machines, and we cut corn, and the corn was about 4 foot 6, 5 foot, really tall, and what have you.
Yes.
You look at corn now. I was looking at a field of wheat the other day. It's about 18 inches, 2 foot. So the whole thing, you don't realize how things just alter. If you're not watching it, it gradually reduces. Obviously, it makes easier for growing, but then you're genetically modifying a plant that really should be about 4 foot 6, 5 foot tall. So
Yes.
you know very well that we're messing with nature at our peril.
Yeah,
And so,
absolutely. I went to Charles Dowding, who is a great advocate of no dig, and he had a small section of his back garden with rye, which again is a similar type of wheat type thing,
yeah,
and yeah, it towered. It towered about 5 to 6 feet. And I had to say, I said, what is that? He said, it's rye. And when and I'm down where I am, you see spring barley and all of that, and it's very low. But normally it would have been much higher. But because they've modified it to suit the monoculture of getting the biggest yield possible and the biggest kernel from it, which actually has fewer minerals and vitamins that you see on the packets. If you have a breakfast cereal and it's made of corn or something, with added vitamins and minerals, because they've taken most of them away from the actual plant itself in the growing process in order to get higher yield. I mean, it's a complete nonsense. And as you say, I mean, when I was younger, as a kid, you'd go and venture into the cornfields, and you could stand up and farmer wasn't very happy, of course, but you could stand up and hide in the blooming sea. Nowadays, you couldn't hide. It wouldn't go up to your knees.
it's so but all these things happen. We look at education, which is on a totally different side of things
Mm.
again. Look at education. Look at what's being taught in schools now. Richard, it was unthinkable. I mean, there's stuff they're teaching to 4 and 5 year olds can't be shown on television before the 9 o'clock watershed. I mean, what on earth do we think is going on? We've got to educate everybody, and make sure that everybody understands. They can make their own minds up once they've seen what is really going on,
Yeah.
and that's the best we can do. But we need to go back to the good old nature, and growing our own food. You have to be careful now with the seeds that you buy to make sure that they are actual natural seeds, and they too have not been genetically modified. So it's a real worry, but we're going to do it. And there's no way that this lot, whoever they think they are, and of course we have to remember that it's not just the Illuminati. The coming after the Illuminati is the Trilateral Commission, And down the pecking order comes the World Economic Forum. So I can tell you, we've got to look at all these people and call them out for what they are. And the governments, of course, then fall way down underneath the World Economic Forum. So we've got a hell of a lot above us, if you like, but there's still more of us than there are of them.
Well, I take comfort in the fact that these people themselves, who think they're above us all, are pretty useless at anything other than taking over the world. And they rely on that people like you and me and many others who are on the ground carrying out their work. And I remember making a video about 3 months ago called Don't Build the Prison, because effectively contractors who don't know any different are just obeying orders, getting on and doing what they normally do, maybe laying 5G cables and things in the ground, are effectively building the prison for themselves, not realizing it. And without those people, the Illuminati can't carry out their work. And so I think in many ways it's very critical that we educate those people who are doing stuff, who innocently doing stuff, because they're only on the need to know, and they only need to know one part of the puzzle, which is they have no idea of the evil intent behind it. It's just, you've got to lay these cables, or we've got to chop these trees down, or we've got to have this monoculture with these seeds because it's all good for the planet. And it's those people that once we can educate those to the greater picture, they may then start thinking, hold on a minute, I'm not very happy about this. And if we can educate those people, we really do have a chance to stop the Illuminati in their tracks, because there's no way they're going to come out and start digging up the road or planting masses of monoculture, because they wouldn't know how to. So they are very much vulnerable. I do think that they have an Achilles heel, and we need to reach that.
Yes, you're right. Now, I've tried through Parliament, as you know, and we've got 650 members of Parliament, of which 360 people tell me have been bought and paid for in one way or another. So that leaves you with only a few. And they're either thick or bought or both, to my mind, with the exception probably on one hand of members of Parliament. So that really is not working, even though I've sent our member of Parliament nearly everything that I've had, and I get the most ridiculous emails back. So it's just a waste of time. But at least he can't say he doesn't know. That's the way I've looked at it. But it's making sure that ordinary people understand what is going on, and then the fight back really does begin, and it's bottom up, not top down.
No, I'm pleased to see that, and in the work that I've been doing, interviewing people, that there are loads of initiatives starting up who have worked it out, and they may be, for example, just groups of people wanting to grow organic food, and they've started that attracts other people, and within those groups they talk about other things going on and the other impositions, and so fortunately word is getting out and people are being informed, and then they say, oh, have a look at this video about such and such, and that helps as well. So I think that the web of the good web of grassroots movements is really, really taking off and helping. But it can, when you're reading something like this on your own, you can feel rather desperate, because you feel disconnected, alone, and impotent in many ways well, what can I do? But of course, as you said, just saying no, mostly they need to get your consent to certain things, having a smart meter, for example, or buying an electric car, or whatever it might be. They have to have your consent to do that. And if you say, actually, thank you very much, very kind of you to offer, I'd rather not, thank you. And keeping everything calm, and not resorting to violence or riots in the street, which is, I think, something that they anticipate, that people, when they're angry, as they discover what's happening to them, they will go out into the street and pitchforks at dawn type thing. But people have more power, I think, if they are much more organised, united, and calm, and calmly refusing, using paperwork, saying thank you very much, but I no longer want to be part of your system. I'm refusing this, and people en masse doing that are going to have a lot more effect, I think.
I think you're entirely right. And I think you had somebody on some time ago who just said, instead of screaming, hollering, and shouting, just said, no, thank you. And when you said no, thank you, and you're really nice and polite about it, it floors them far more, and they've got no way to come back.
Mm.
But if you get aggressive, then they've got a chance of coming back at you. But it's going to take a massive amount of work, Richard, in the next literally months. We haven't got years anymore. And this has come up it's crept up very, very stealthily, if you like, on us. But we have only got a very short space of time, and all sorts of things are being threatened in the ether, if you like, of what they're going to do. But we together we can all make a difference, and we can all stop this.
Fear, actually, you mentioned there's a lot of things coming down the pipeline, and fear is one of the tools that they use to corral people to follow something, which is usually something they've suggested. And we saw that during the pandemic. The fear of something made a lot of people panic and do something to themselves, which perhaps they might later regret. And this is where we do need people to take a step back. And when you look at something that's fearful, instead of freezing or running, is to think, actually, is there any legitimacy to this? Who is it who's telling me this? What have we learnt from recent events? Is it the mainstream media? Is it the government? Is it the council? Is it effectively corporations telling us what to do? Or is it actually a clear-thinking member of my family, or a neighbour, or somebody I respect and trust, who may be more connected than me, rather than just because everybody else is doing something? Is that a sensible policy? Because the use of fear does happen at the moment rather a lot, and a lot of it is just threats. People are going to come in and arrest you if you have a wood-burning stove, or you'll go to prison for a year. Well, they'll need a hell of a lot of prisons, I would think, if people don't want to have a smart meter, for example, and where are they going to put them? And if you just say, I'm sorry, my house is private, you have no right to access it. I don't want a smart meter. Thank you very much. I'll continue to pay my electricity bill. I'm a law-abiding citizen, but I'd rather not have it. Thank you. It is, as you say, will floor them, and staying calm instead of letting fear get the better of you is going to be, I think, much more beneficial to all of us, rather than a huge panic.
Yeah, there's no point in panicking either. Richard, if you've done some of the jobs that you and I have had in the past, panicking was not an option, because panicking only makes things a lot worse. But I do feel
Absolutely.
sorry for people on their own, or people that are in a household whereby one person thinks the way we do, and one person thinks, the other way, that we've got it wrong, and that all the things that are being done are correct. And that must be absolute hell on earth to sort out.
Mm.
But I'm very lucky, and I know you are too, and that we think the same way, and etc. But it can be also lonely for people who are on their own. But that's all the more reason why we start educating people. More people start talking, and when more people start talking, more people will understand and cooperate with each other, so people won't feel alone. I know. I think it's in cities it's worse, Richard, than in the country. When I was in Peterborough, people came to me from Birmingham, from Nottingham, and said, we feel so alone. Whereas in the country, probably because we're a lot nosier, we normally know what's going on with our neighbours and what have you, and we do chat. I mean, neighbours do. It always has been that way.
Mm. Yeah,
So I think that's
absolutely.
that's the difference. But it's getting people to talk, and getting people not to be afraid to talk, because
Yeah.
people are certainly think that they're going to be in trouble if they open their mouths.
And
We
if they
have,
try to shut you down, if people try to stop you from talking, you know that the thing you are trying to talk about must have some legitimacy. And we've seen that with a particularly famous individual on YouTube who has recently, in in the YouTube world has been shut down. Well, it's still going, but he's been demonetized, and you know that they must be on the money then.
Absolutely. And what is it? When you get over the target, the flat gets a bit stronger, so you know that you are on the money. And some of us have stood up there and have been going from day one. Others are coming sort of later to it. And the other thing is not to say to people when they do understand what's going on, well, I tried to tell you, I did tell you, etc. It's welcome, come along and join the rest of us. And there are all sorts of groups. I think you went and talked to one the other day down in Reigate, didn't you?
Mm.
Um, all sorts of groups. The Stand in the Parks have done a wonderful job of getting people, and you can watch people if you stand and look. People walk by, walk around and look and see what's happening, and then they come a bit closer, and then they realise that they aren't on their own. It's a wonderful. Stand in the Park has been an absolutely tremendous way of getting people organised and spoken to, really. I think it's a fantastic organisation.
And it's great to be offline. I mean, there's loads of fantastic Telegram groups and WhatsApp groups, and they're all doing great things, of course, and people are sharing content and videos and ideas and what have you. But it is so nice and to meet people in the flesh, as it were, and be able to talk quietly, privately, one to one, or in small groups, because you feel much more secure. On the one hand, you feel the love and compassion from other people, and you can hear also other people's stories and read the body language. And I know from going around doing the talks that I've been asked to do, and I enter the room and you see all these wonderful people. They've all got their own concerns. They've all got some bits of advice, which is great. How they've dodged something, which is fantastic. And I love that. And we share that, and a little tidbit will go around, and we go, oh yeah, no, thanks very much for that. So the more that we meet in the real world, I think is so heartening, because ultimately that's where we want to be, in this real world, rather than pushed away forever behind screens. Which is an irony, because we're doing this
You know what?
on Zoom and on the
Yes,
internet.
absolutely. But when I've looked at the conference, because I'm sat watching the faces of everybody, and the difference between a long face and a serious face is really striking. Because a long face is somebody that's miserable and downcast, etc. But you don't see that. You see people intently listening, and there's always humour. I haven't yet had a speaker that hasn't managed to create a huge amount of laughter and energy, if you like. There's so much energy in the room.
Mm.
But sometimes people are serious, obviously, because it is a serious subject. But there's also huge amounts of smiling and humour, and which the other side don't seem to have.
No, and they don't like it. They don't like being taken, the Mickey taken out of them, which is why it is quite funny to sort of talk about people like Klaus Schwab as a Bond villain, although I do think that's probably intentional anyway. But these people do need to have the Mickey taken out of them, so that they know that we're not in fear, that we are full of energy, and we are resourceful people, and that we love to live, and we're going to carry on living. Living and breathing, no matter what they throw at us. Yeah, go on, try your best. But we are going to battle through all of that. And in doing so, we'll have a few laughs. Why not?
Absolutely not, Richard. And I think that's the whole thing. And we actually go back to where we were years ago, and go back to much more back to nature, and stop all this jabbing of children. I mean, 69 inoculations by the time they're 13 or 14 is it's scandalous. And
Yes.
most of these, if you look, most of these diseases that they're being inoculated against now had disappeared anyway, because of change in sanitation and change in water and change in systems, etc. So most things had disappeared anyway. This is what people don't understand. They think that we're what do they call us, anti-vaxxers. For some of the serious things years ago, the vaccines years ago were totally different than the ones that they're producing now, and there were so few of them. But now, when
Yeah.
you've got so many, it's no wonder people are not well.
And you've got to ask yourself, how is it that the human race is here today after hundreds of thousands of years where we've not had vaccines and all of that nonsense? We were eating much healthier diets. We were exercising a lot more. We weren't quite as sedentary as we are now in front of screens. And we didn't have the internet, electricity, modern pharmaceuticals. Somehow it's incredible, isn't it, that the human being has got to here today, and now we need, as a child, 69 inoculations in order to try and hopefully live a few more years. It is a nonsense, and I think we have got to sort of get to grips with the fact that we have an immune system that has amazing capabilities. The body wants to heal itself, and it does. We detox all the time. And half the time we don't need all this nonsense that we're shoving into ourselves. So it's really just trying to get people to open their mind to the fact that a lot of the stuff that we're being told is irrelevant, unneeded, and nonsense. And of course, a lot of it is an anti-human. And we see it in the world today. So many laws and things are so anti-human. And yet these are people set up who supposedly say this is for our benefit, and you think, but this is just, it's a penal society. It's like we're all living in a prison. You just can't see the bars and the barbed wire.
It's absolutely nonsense, Richard, and I totally agree. And of course, Agenda 21 is Agenda 21 being for the 21st century, and then the 2 year goals are 2030 and 2050. And you notice that Rishi Sunak is now pushing back electric cars to 2035 and all this sort of nonsense that's going on. I'd like to see how many cars he thinks he's going to sell between now and 2030 or 2035 in the electric car market to solve a problem that isn't there in the first place.
Yes. Well, obviously, we'd have to send a lot more children down the mines to get all the necessary the metals, which are very depleted and difficult to get to, in order to make those cars, the batteries for the cars to run in the first place.
Where are
So
all people complaining bitterly about children being sent down cobalt mines, Richard? You know,
and
you know
yeah,
what I'm.
where are
Where
they?
are
Yeah,
they?
exactly. Where are they? It's out of sight, out of mind, isn't it? It's that old chestnut. And same with the wind, with all these turbines that has massive amount of cement and metal in the ground in order to keep these things up. That I learnt recently, you need diesel to start the things. It just seems absurd. And yet people are quite are happy to sort of accept, oh, this is good for us. Maybe people have just been dumbed down a bit too much, and I don't want to say, I don't want to insult anybody, but is it that we no longer care, and we don't sort of look at things critically anymore? And then as you start to look at things, and you go, oh, hang on a minute, that policy seems a bit mad, because if that's only up, that wind tower is only up for, say, 20 years, but it's had this much carbon in order to erect the thing, and then it's going into landfill, and it's going to rot and leach into the water system, and there's millions of these bloody towers. Actually, does that really work? Does the policy, and if the wind's not blowing, does it work? And it doesn't take much to sort of work these little puzzles out and think, maybe this isn't the best suggestion after all. And no thanks, we'd rather not.
And unfortunately, we've got to make much more of the no thanks, because if you look at, I lived in Mid Wales for many years, my real home, if you like. And if you look and see what's happened on the top of all the hillsides and mountains in Mid Wales, all you can see now is miles and miles and miles of wind farms, which is, it's just absolutely destroyed the ecology, it destroyed everything. So, it's come with a huge price that we shouldn't have paid, but they
Hmm.
didn't listen to the local people because we didn't make enough noise. And of course, in local rural areas like Mid Wales, there are few people anyway. So if there's only 100 people in the vicinity and 100 people make a noise, it really doesn't really matter to the politicians when they're being elected for Parliament, Richard. So that's
Yes.
the other problem the countryside has, I'm afraid.
Well, they won't be able to get to the mountains to look at these lovely wind farms because they can only go 20 miles an hour now, all the way through. Well, not everywhere, but it's and again, people are going, oh yes, it's very good because it's going to save lives and it'll be very good for the children because after all, the impact on a child, so I read from the official government legislation was if a car hits you at 20, it's a lot less than it would if it hit you at 30. And I thought, yeah, well, if a car hit you at 90, it would be a lot less than if it hit you at 120. I couldn't really get the argument on any of that, considering you can't get out of second or third gear. It's not economic for the car, so you're churning out more pollution as a result of driving at a reduced rate anyway. So it is all bonkers, and I think some of these things are beginning to wake people up, but we definitely need to get more people to say no thank
Well,
you.
when you think of the weight of a car battery in an electric car, I presume then that you'll have to go from 20 miles an hour to 5 miles an hour because the weight of hitting somebody at 20 miles an hour in an electric vehicle is far worse than hitting somebody at 20 miles in an in an ICE vehicle. So, what are you going to do when the electric vehicles come? Go down to 5 miles an hour?
Well, we'll all be on milk floats. Of course, not many people remember the milk floats, but I remember the milk floats. And funny enough, they didn't have massive, great big batteries. How did that work? No idea. Liz, it's been wonderful to talk to you about this remarkable book, the Illuminati Agenda 21. Um,
Yeah.
I'll put a link to how people can get it if they so wish. Do consider buy a week. I've got no affiliate with it. I shall make sure I don't put an affiliate link with it so people can buy it knowing that it's just straight. But of course, get it from any bookshop, not just where I recommend. And see what you make of it because it would be interested in. I'd be interested in your comments. And if you've got ideas of how we can push back, besides saying no, thank you, and setting up initiatives and things, would be more than interested to hear ideas and solutions and remedies, because we need to do something and we need to act very quickly.
Thank you, Richard, for having me on to discuss it. And yes, I think not only will they read it, but I hope that the links within the book itself, people will
Yes.
then go on to expand a bit further to the Trilateral Commission and all these other bodies that Bilderbergers and et cetera, et cetera, World Bank, World Government, United Nations. You need to explore all these to really see what's going on.
Well, it's been a joy to discuss a difficult subject. I'm looking forward to meeting up with you at the next Great Resist conference, which I think is, as you say, up in the north. Never eat shredded wheat in the north, eat west. And looking forward to that. No doubt before then we'll probably get back and have a chat about what's going on there.
Good. It's the 11th of November, which is Armistice Day. That's all I'll say, because we're carrying on the fight. That is why we chose Armistice Day. And so that those that did unfortunately lose their lives in World War II and World War One, they've not been forgotten. We are still continuing to fight for the freedom that they fought for.
So put that date in your diary and we'll fill you in nearer the time. In the meantime, all the links will be in the description. Thank you for watching. Thank you for coming on, Liz. It's been absolutely brilliant. And I'll be back with more monologues and the usual things that I do, guests and things. But in the meantime, from Liz and I, thanks very much. Goodbye.